I've encountered many people who are skeptics who would deny that there's any kind of evidential basis for the Christian faith, that to be a Christian requires a blind leap of faith. But is that really the case? I'm joined today by Dr. Gavin Ortlund, who is a Christian scholar and a pastor, to help address these issues. Gavin, I've heard you give a really interesting talk where you described 4 testimonies to the truth of the Christian faith. Could you briefly just list out those 4 testimonies? In future episodes, we'll unpack each one of them in some detail. But for now, just what are those 4 testimonies to truth?
Yeah, I like to try to put them in the form of a question. So they would be, why is there something rather than nothing? Could it all have happened just by accident? What are good and evil? Or more specifically, are good and evil objective? And then, could the gospel be just a fairy tale? Those are the 4 ways I put it in a question form, and really there's sort of classical arguments. You could think of them as the cosmological argument, the teleological or the argument from design, the moral argument, and then kind of a combination of the argument from desire and Pascal's wager. Mm-hmm. And those aren't the only testimonies or arguments that you can use, but they're just 4 that have been really helpful for me.
Now, why would you use the term testimony instead of argument when you describe these 4 categories of evidence?
Yeah, I mean, we could call them arguments too. I kind of like calling them testimonies because, first of all, it's right in line with scriptural language in Psalm 19:1 or Romans 1:20, which talks about how not just God's existence, but God's nature is revealed through what he has made. And I would see that as encompassing not just, Kant spoke of the starry host above and the moral law within. And I think all of that is within the purview of Romans 1:20. Everything that God has made from the human heart to the stars above gives testimony to his creation. But I've just found it as a strategy for when you're engaging with people. Speaking of things as testimonies can be a little bit more subtle. You could do this by calling them arguments too, but in my own mind, I don't really think of these things as slam dunk arguments that work on any person, no matter what their presuppositions are. I think of them more as testimonies that are powerful as a cumulative case. Mm-hmm. And there are ways that people can try to argue with them, and if you want to get around the force of it, you can find a way. But the question I come back to is, what's the best way to understand our world? And I think these are 4 areas where not just, there's an appeal not just to the mind and to the intellect, but there's also a kind of appeal to the emotion and to the intuition. And there's kind of a gut level impact that each of these questions has that I think the human heart can resonate with as well as the human mind. And I've just found these have been 4 helpful ways to try to kind of give a portrait of here's why I think it's really reasonable to believe in a creator God, and specifically in the case of the last point especially, but really the last several, to believe in the Trinitarian God of the Bible.